Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, February 4th, 2025 study session of the Olympia City Council. For the record, we have a quorum with all council members present. So this evening we have three agenda items, business items to discuss for our agenda setting this evening. We have the Olympia Fire Department update, the Olympia 2045 Natural Environment chapter of the Comprehensive Plan update, and we also have our Economy chapter of the Comprehensive Plan update on the agenda this evening. So with that, I am going to turn it over to our Fire Chief, Matt Morris, for the update on the Fire Department.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate it. And so, Council, everybody, thank you for giving me an opportunity to kind of sit down with you this evening and give you a bit of an update on the work we've been doing this last year and really specific to the strategic planning for the organization. I'll kind of take you through a little bit of a journey. And strategic planning in the fire department is always a little bit of a challenge because most people in the fire department do really well reacting to an emergency rather than planning for one. And so strategic planning is always an undertaking in an organization. It takes a lot of energy and focus. And so a lot of great things in the last year and more to come in 25. So we'll dive through this. I promise that I will respect your time and keep this relatively short and to the point, and we can get to some questions along the way. So we began our strategic planning in the first quarter of 24, and really with a moment of kind of looking back into the organization, trying to see where we were at on a lot of things. One big piece of that was an employee survey, an anonymous survey that we gathered. We had a significant I think we had over 70% submission from our employees, which spoke a lot to their interest in the process. And what we gathered from that, and we worked with Wendy Frazier, our consultant with the city, that the city has used on a lot of things to do this. We gathered was that our employees were optimistic and they're willing to help. They're looking for opportunities to contribute, and they want to feel valued and appreciated. And so when you look at it from that perspective, the other lens on that, of course, is that they don't feel those things at the time. They're looking for those things. And so from my perspective, that was a big red flag for us to be concerned about. And so then we kind of turned to more of an environmental scan into the organization as a whole and what we were doing in the organization, the services we provide, and so forth. And so what we recognized was that there has been a significant growth in the demand for services of the fire department over the last 10 years. 53% in 10 years growth in call volume, amongst other services, prevention services and such. The organization was doing a really nice job of collecting a lot of data points, but not necessarily performance indicators as well as outcome measurements. And so that's one of the things that we're working on 25 is starting to put those dots together between just how many times do you do something, what does that translate to outcomes in the community. And so that was kind of the first start of this as we look back. Some of the bigger key takeaways from this process was the organizational current staffing at the beginning of 24 was we were significantly understaffed in the positions that we had budgeted, and we were operating way too many vacancies, and it was having a very significant negative impact on the workforce, having to cover all the vacancies. The outcome of the RFA process. The RFA process as a whole, something like that takes a big toll on an organization, right? As we all know, and everybody here that was part of that process. The outcome, of course, was not what a lot of people wanted. It was what some other people did want. And so it was a divisive issue, and in the organization it left a bit of a mark. And so we had to work our way through some of the feelings for that. A lot of people talked about organizational structure and the fact that there was some confusion in the organization on who talked to who's in charge of what was the hierarchy, how did information flow, things like that. And so we had to do some work on kind of clarifying some structure in the organization. And that kind of led to this bigger concern that we identified relatively quickly of some morale and cultural issues within the organization as a result of the journey the organization had been on for probably the last 5 years. When you take into account all the things that impacted the organization over the last 5 years, from the RFA process to the pandemic, to the public health emergencies within our community, the homelessness, the fentanyl crisis, things like that, the impact all it has in the organization And at the same time, you go through 4 different leadership teams at the same time over that course of time. That creates quite an impact in the organization that we needed to kind of work our way through. So where are we now? Those are what we have worked on in 24. I'll talk a little bit about those as we go through the process and through the presentation, as we get into kind of what our plan is for the future, and what we've done in those areas in 24. And so our focus has been increasing our staffing, establishing a clear structure, establishing our new services, the BLS transport, as well as the CARES program. I'll talk a little bit about that, and more than happy to answer any questions you may have on those things. We're working real hard on identifying our capital needs. In that same time of that 5 or 6 year window where the organization is going through a lot of that in that RFA process, that really prevents the ability for the city to invest in the capital needs of the fire department. And we've identified some significant shortfalls in our capital needs that we're going to need to work hard on, and the city manager and I are working hard on identifying mechanisms to address those needs, which of course is the financial challenges. So in 24, we have hired 29 firefighter positions. In 23, we hired 9, so there's 38 positions that have been hired in the last 18 months. We have another 5 starting this week. So when you do the math on that, right, is over 43 firefighter positions new in the organization. There's only 98 positions budgeted in operations. Half of them are less than 2 years on the job. 14 promotions made, including the organizational structure changes. The structure changes that we made is we established 2 deputy chief positions, and we basically split the organization into 3 sections, right? Is we have operations, we have support systems and risk reduction, and then we have administration and support. So we have the 3 big branches. And then we kicked off the strategic planning, right? Questions on any of this stuff so far? Yes, sir.
Chief, I'm wondering, my ears had perked up about the morale and culture and the concerns you were starting out with about how do you maintain an established culture when you, and I was going to ask how many have come in the last 5 years, but even just in the last 18 months or 2 years, if half of your field staff are recent hires, how do you communicate to them or develop with them a culture? Because it's not the same culture that people 20 years working side by side had, right?
Right. No, I appreciate that. Absolutely. We spend a lot of time talking about what culture is and what it means to us, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that as we get into our guiding principles that we identified as a group. There's a lot of risk and disadvantages to having that many new staff in an organization, especially that's highly dependent upon experience for decision making. But at the same time, it also creates a great opportunity to establish a healthy and strong culture in the organization at the same time, right? And so all opportunities come with a little up and downs, right? And so I'll spend a little bit of time on that, but we are intentional in our communication. We talk about what we believe in. Because in my opinion, culture is defined by how you act as an organization, and how you act is defined on what you believe in. And so everybody behaves based on their belief systems. And so we talk about our shared belief systems in the fire department.
Chief?
Sir.
How has the new hires affected the amount of overtime that our firefighters are working? And I remember hearing quite a bit about how that has been a burden on them.
Right.
So how's that shaping up?
We've seen a little bit of help in it, and the reason that it's a little early to tell is most of these folks have just hit the floor in the last 6 months. And they're not allowed to work overtime in their first 6 months to a year in operations, just because of we want to really focus on their development and establishment in the organization. And so as they become more overtime eligible, then I think we'll see some more, a decrease in the amount of overtime each member is working in the organization. And new employees don't take time off, right? And so they don't create overtime at the same time. And so I think we'll see some benefit. The disadvantage is when you hire young employees like this. I think we have 8 employees currently that are expecting babies. So there's 8 employees that'll be taking 12 weeks off in the next year. So it's just, again, the up and down of it all, right? And so, yeah. So strategic planning, we spent.
Chief.
Yes, sir.
One moment.
Yeah, please. I'm
Councilmember
sorry.
Vanderpool.
Just a quick question. Of the 29, how many of them are medic? Because that's a shortage too.
Yeah, maybe 7 or 8 of them have been paramedics.
Okay.
So where we are at right now in our staffing is that with the academy that's starting right now, at the end of June, when they graduate, assuming that they all graduate, we will be fully staffed other than 2 paramedic positions.
Okay. Because that takes time.
Correct, yeah. And so our staffing challenges is the timeline it takes to get people hired and through the training. And so if we have somebody leave the organization, let's say January 1st, we won't get that position vetted and hired and eligible to hire for about 3 months after that, 3 or 4 months after that. There's no academy to send them to. The next academy is not till the following January. Then they don't graduate till the following June. So if you leave the organization in January, I don't replace you in staffing for 18 months. It takes that long. And that's how you end up behind. And that's why you have to be so intentional in predicting and analyzing and anticipating your vacancies and not allowing yourself to fall behind, because it takes too long to get caught up. We'll spend 18 months just getting caught up, just getting ourselves to where we're almost fully staffed. So it's a challenge.
Thank you.
So strategic planning. So based on our environmental scan and kind of our look back in the interviews in the organization and the information gathering, it was pretty obvious that we need to spend some time on our own house first and kind of spend some time within our organization in identifying the cultural issues and opportunities to really kind of build a culture. So we spent some time in the organization building guiding principles, and it was a collaborative, transparent with labor management, employee-driven, employee-centric opportunity for the employees to kind of share what they believe in, what they see the organization's guiding principles are and should be. So we established a purpose. The fire service is a difficult career. People do things in their line of work that are very taxing, damaging, harmful to them, both mentally and physically. It's a difficult line of work to do. It's not healthy, good work. But what makes it worthwhile is the purpose behind it. And if they believe and remember the purpose, then the sacrifice is worth it. And so we have to remind them of the purpose, right? And so that it's not about paychecks or benefits or contracts. It's about the opportunity to take care of people. That's why they get into the line of work originally, and we just need to keep that in their focus, right? Because it's easy to get distracted. And so we posted and publish our why. It's just to take care of people. And so we remind people that consistently, and they remind us of that pretty well as well. We created a new vision statement for the organization because there was multiple kind of history of different vision statements in the organization that was creating some confusion. There were short ones and long ones and difficult to remember. And we wanted to support the city's bigger vision statement of what the city of Olympia is trying to accomplish as a city. And so what is the fire department's role in that, and how do we support that? And so this is what the staff created. It was this statement of, they see the fire department as being a trusted leader of a safe and thriving capital city. And so we take the time to break that statement down in our organization. We talk about what it means to be trusted and what it means to be a leader and what it means to earn trust. And that's the currency we use in our community is trust. It allows us as an organization to grow and change. What it means to be influential and motivational in the community, in the organization as a leader, and what safe and thriving means. And so, because if we're going to talk about how does the fire department measure its outcomes and its impact in the community, then we need to talk about what does the fire department do, and if we're doing those things, is the community safer? Is it more thriving? Are we influential? Are we motivational? Are we leaders in the community? Because if we can say we are, then we're doing the right things. We need to be able to measure and prove that. Then we talked about our belief system. These were already in the organization. They didn't make any changes. Everybody believed in this. It was a good opportunity to refresh it and put it back on the wall and talk about it and put it back as a focus. And we created that intent in the organization to talk about professionalism, compassion, integrity, and stewardship, and what they mean to our employees. And we talk about what does that look like. And so I meet with every new employee when we hire them as a group. I spend time with them, and I talk about, if I look at you and say, I need you to be a professional firefighter, let me explain to you what that looks like, and what actions and behaviors demonstrate that. And so that it's not just enough to say it, let me tell you what that looks like. And so that's how we build a culture. Now, our mission is simply what we do, right? This is something that we and should change over time. As the community needs change of us, then we will change our mission. I think the biggest and most important part of this mission statement that we currently have is it really identifies and prioritizes the intent to reduce risk in the community rather than just to respond to a negative impact of risk. Right, is that the fire department's function in the community is not simply just to respond to when something bad's happened, but to also really work hard in the community to prevent the bad thing from happening. And not only to prevent it from happening, the frequency of it, but the severity of it as well. Right? And so when it does happen, the outcome of it is not as significant in the community. So we created 4 goals. Right? And so as we go through this, we sat down as an organization, we said, okay, so here's our vision, here's our mission, here's our purpose. What are our 4 big goals? And it came down to 4, and it started with a lot more than that, and it kind of started to come into buckets. And so we created 4 goals, and then basically under each of these goals, as I talk about them, is the bigger objective within that goal. And then I'll kind of wrap it up with our 25 work plan, which is really the initiatives that we're going to try to push forward in the year. So the first goal is to exceed the community's expectations in the delivery of our services, not just in our emergency services, not just in our operations or fire suppression or EMS, but in all of the services that we provide, whether that be cares or prevention, public education, things like that. Our objectives are timely and effective response, and what does that mean? And we define those things. Recruit and retain professionals. Our community expects our fire department to be staffed and capable and ready, right? We can't offer, well, we don't have enough staffing. That's not an excuse that our community should accept. And then ensure that the fire department is aligned with the community's needs and industry standards, which means we need to start asking the community what they need from us. And we can do that by looking at the data. There's no better way. The next goal is to invest in the development, well-being, and voice of all of our team members. I think it's really important in the fire department that fire departments can become very militaristic in the sense of do as you say, don't ask questions kind of approach. That's not how we want to run an organization like this. And so we want to create opportunities, and so we are intentional when it comes to committee establishments and work groups, opportunities for people to participate in trainings and education opportunities, to be instructors, things like that, to contribute in the organization outside of their normal duties. And then to recognize what the professional growth is and create succession planning and staffing planning. And if you're a brand new firefighter and you say to yourself, I think I want to be the fire chief one day, well then we should have something that says these are the steps that you should take over the course of your career to make yourself eligible to become a fire chief. The next goal is continue to improve the resiliency and sustainability of the organization. City manager and I spend a lot of time on this topic, and we work really hard to identify realistic needs of the organization, as well as how do we pay for that and how do we keep it sustainable and resilient to that, right? There's a lot of outside forces and internal forces in an organization that challenge us. Pandemics, for an example, right, is a huge impact in the organization. We've identified that the organization is currently significantly underfunded in its capital needs. We were fortunate enough this year to find the funding to purchase 2 fire engines, 2 aid units. We don't have any funding allocated for the next fire engines that we need to purchase, or how we're going to pay for the capital needs when it comes to fire stations. Stations have a lifespan. Station 2 on the west side is currently housing 7 people. It's designed for 5. Right, we're running three apparatus out of the station that's designed for 2. Right, how do we fund that need in the community? Right, that's a huge ticket. It's a lot of money that we need to identify, and how do we do that? We have some really significant immediate needs. We're 9 years into an air pack system that is probably going to last 12 to 15. 15 on the highest typically. So we're 3 to 5, 6 years from needing a new air pack system. That's going to be $1 million plus purchase. It's a regulated, federally regulated requirement to purchase, that we have to do that. It's a mandated purchase. Radios will be another one. We just got all new radios last year through the TCERN project at TCOM. We're on the hook for the next round of radios. That's about 8 years away, right? Multi-million-dollar purchase. So those items we know are coming, and we just need to be able to put together how do we pay for those things and maintain our resiliency to that. Cultivating trusted relationships in our community and region. And this is one of those goals that I'm hopeful that council can help guide the fire department here in the community, who to talk to, when to talk to, how to talk to, what are the points, what are the needs of your constituency for the fire department. And so this will be a topic that I'm going to be calling, knocking on your doors hopefully, and you can help us, right, and guide us here. And how do we get out in the community and build trust and relationships in the community outside of our response systems, right? We have a tendency to expect people just to trust us. We need to build that trust outside of a 911 call. So the work plan 25, it started with branding. Kelly's team was fantastic. We learned a lot about branding from Kelly's team. You would think as firefighters, we could just draw something up on a piece of paper and call it good. Evidently, that's not how it works. Yeah, I learned a little something there. So Kelly's team really was fantastic. What we discovered in Donna from Kelly's team really helped us in this one is the fire department had about 12 different logos, if you will, in existence in various different places. When we talk about culture and identity in an organization, we need to clean that up, right? And so what we came down to is that upper left corner, that is the primary logo for the Olympia Fire Department. The one in the circle is the one that was created as a decal or uniform logo that you'll see on the t-shirts, on the door of the fire station, things like that. But letterhead official logo is upper left. And you can see that they're basically the same. The other one just has the capital around it. So that was created, the one in the circle was created by one of our own members. Kelly's team just cleaned it up a little bit, made it presentable. So that creates an opportunity in the organization to talk about our identity. I mentioned at our retreat about the standard of cover community risk assessment. That is what we're in the midst of now. That's the heavy lift in the organization. That will be a presentation to council that will be very data centric. It'll talk about the community, and it'll talk about the community in a very small slices, small increments, and we'll look at the city in 1 square mile grid, and then within those miles, what's happening, who lives there, what are their needs, based on our history, what kind of events are we running there, and how do we best reduce the risk in that area of the community. And then in that conversation will be a conversation about response standards, right? Service level standards, and what is it that the community needs? What is it that the city council wants their fire department to perform at? What levels? So we talk about response times. We talk about effective response forces, and all these kinds of things. And how many firefighters do we respond to the scene of an event based on the critical tasks that need to be accomplished at that event, right? A lot of that's established in national fire standards, response standards. And so we'll do that presentation for you this year, and we'll walk our way all the way through that. And then we're doing
Chief,
a lot of, yes.
I have a question.
Yes, yes.
So how would we determine something like that for standards of cover? Would we look at statewide averages of different departments to help inform that decision, or?
Right, well, so there's the NFPA standard speaks to a response time standard. I think the most important thing that we're going to want to do is talk about response time standards as well as outcome measurements. And so we're going to want to talk about when we arrive to a fire, so it's the least frequent, most significant event in your community, right? The things that we do the least of but has the greatest impact for negative impact in your community. And so that event, when we arrive, we want that to get better from the moment we get there, not get worse before it gets better, right? And so we need to start measuring those things, right? We're going to want to talk about civilian injury, firefighter injury, things like that, as a result of these events in the community. And so the fire accreditation, the NFPA, there's a lot of guidelines out there that we can kind of start at, and then I think it'll be a good conversation for us to talk about. We've seen our response times get longer over the last 5 years to 5 to 8 years. It's reported at the 90th percentile as a national standard, and so we've gone from 9:20 to 10:30 at the 90th percentile. So 9 times out of 10, it takes us, the 9th time it'll take us 10.5 minutes to get there, first arriving resource. Not an average. Averages really don't tell you a whole lot when we're dealing in that kind of performance, right? So, now that sounds like a big number, but then the next question you have to ask yourself is that having a negative impact in the safety or thriving of your community or not? And I can't tell you that today because we don't have the data or the research to know yet, right? I can say anecdotally, in my experience, that feels like a big number. But the city of Olympia is a very unique community, as we all know. Right? And so what does our community need performance-wise to meet the needs of the community at the service levels that you want it to be at? Is that fair? So give me a minute and we'll get to that. As an organization, that'll be the conversation with that standard cover that we'll walk our way through. Budget analysis and review. We're doing a lot of work here, right? And I know that we're doing the priority-based budgeting this year, which is going to be, feed right into this, is going to be a fantastic exercise for the fire department. The fire department's budget is like a lot of budgets. It started somewhere and it's just been kind of a add-on remodel over the year, over year. And I think there's an opportunity for us to really align our budget with the objectives or needs or the goals of the organization. Are we spending the money on our priorities correctly? Right? And I think the citywide, bigger priority budgeting initiative this year is just going to support all of this. So it's kind of an exciting thing for the fire chief. It's exciting, at least. Maybe not for people on fire engines, but we're working through a community risk reduction plan. And so that's not just in the prevention world of codes and inspections, but also in public education, ordinances, municipal ordinances, things like that. How do we best reduce and establish an intent in the community to reduce the risk, right? That it's not okay just to be okay with running call after call, right? We should be looking to reduce the calls. Training succession plan, I mentioned that a second ago, and so when you have that many employees that are new in the organization, a training plan is a pretty important thing to have. Our firefighters make decisions based on primarily 2 things, right? They're what they've been taught and what they've seen. If they haven't seen it yet, the only thing they have to base their decision making on is what they've been taught. And if we haven't taught them and they haven't seen it, then the decision making is going to be difficult for them. And so we stack our responses with senior members. We roll the battalion chief to more events now, right? We're paying a little bit more attention to that. Capital asset plan, we've talked about that. We talked about our equipment. We talked about the facilities. We've taken a couple of good first steps, but we have more to go. So CARES growth and development. So CARES is a new service this year, as well as the BLS transport. Those are 2 big undertakings in a fire department to establish 2 completely new service delivery models in the organization, in the community. So CARES, led by Serena, has done a tremendous job this year. They have really kind of starting to identify in the community 2 main areas for them to focus on. The first is call generation, to reducing the call generating facilities that utilize 911 as more of a part of their business model than it should be. And so it's an education effort. And we're partnered with Choice, the ACH in town, on a grant that's funding 1 full-time FTE. That's the focus of that FTE, is to spend time every day, all day, meeting with facilities and teaching and educating and really looking to reduce the reliance on 911 when that's really not the right answer. And then the other thing they're identifying is the members of the community that are utilizing 911 because that's the only service they have available to them. Right? And they don't know how else to navigate their needs. They have a need in their personal lives. They don't know how to fix it. They don't know how to navigate it, so they use 911 as the catch-all. And so those referrals of those folks in our community, the frequent users of 911 or the people that just have no other options, really becomes a social, social worker intent, right? And so that's why Serena and Stephanie are both, dedicated social workers who are doing case management work. Now, we did remove one FTE that was initially allocated to CARES as a result of the budget reductions in 25. Now, we are also in current discussions with the local area agency on aging to potentially fund an additional FTE. Now, unfortunately, that's all on hold as a result of the current concerns over federal funding streams, right? And so before they're willing to commit to that, they're concerned about the ability to support it, so, which is, I think, understandable. And so we're hopeful that we can get a green light on that in the near future. We've also partnered with the city of Tumwater. They're funding a half-time FTE that we're in the process of onboarding, which is really focused on that social work outreach as well. And so the referral system comes from our crews, it comes from the hospitals, and it comes from the police department, things like that. And so as we identify these people in the community, CARES is reaching out to them, making contact, and working to try to get them connected to the right services to try to get whatever their needs are addressed, right? And trying to meet them where they're at on that type of thing rather than them having to use 911 because that's all they have. So, yes, absolutely. And it's so difficult to measure the outcome of a CARES program because it's hard to prove the negative, right? How do you prove what they did created something to not happen, right? And so I will share that the 24 total incidents is basically matched 23. There's no change. It was flat one year to the next, which hasn't been seen in the last 5 or 8 years in the organization. So did CARES play a role in that? I'm going to say yes. Right? I don't know how I can prove that to you, but anecdotally, I would say that for sure it has. Peer support program is an ongoing support piece that for our members in the organization for their mental, physical, and spiritual health. As I mentioned, we need to focus on taking care of our folks, and they will take care of our community. And so that's a big part of that. And so we've partnered with a couple of different agencies to provide services and that are focused on first responder needs and not just generic services. It's really difficult for people to get connected to support systems when they need help and when they're in crisis. And when they do finally get connected to that support system, it's really beneficial when that support system understands what you're talking about from your perspective. When you sit down with somebody, they don't have a clue what it means to be a first responder, it's hard to get started, right? And so those specific peer support programs are important. And then we're going to be focused on regional participation as an organization. And so we're going to be leaders not only in our community, but in our region. As an organization, we're going to attempt to be a positive influence and motivation in the greater region of Thurston County. Olympia is in the driver's seat in a lot of ways. We're not like there is no other city like Olympia in Thurston County. I think we all agree to that. And so the lessons we have, the 166 years of service that this fire department has in this community, no one else can bring that to the table but us. And so we'll be intentional about that.
Chief, question on the peer support groups. So, for example, during my time in the military, I know that there were a lot of soldiers, for example, that were reluctant to do any sort of support out of fear of losing their job. So can you talk a little bit about
Sure.
like how are you creating a culture so that firefighters are willing to take advantage of those types of
I
programs?
appreciate it. So it comes from all directions, right? And so not only does it come from the leadership, but it comes from the membership as well. And so our labor group is instrumental in this, and that our union president is one of the driving forces in the region when it comes to peer support. There's no doubt that the culture of the military, the culture of the fire service are very similar in that sense, and that we have to remove the stigmas of the conversation about mental health in the fire service. I've had too many of my close friends succumb to suicides, and it's a leading cause of death in first responders in our nation, second only to cancer. And so, it's something we have to talk about. When we talk about believing in compassion, then we talk about believing in grace and understanding. and that we lead with grace. And so that's grace for each other and grace for ourselves. And so the ability for a firefighter to admit that they are struggling is the biggest hurdle that we will continue to face. If we can get to that point, then we have an opportunity. What we talk about is we talk about fitness a lot. We talk about keeping people in shape, but then we talk about mental health from a crisis intervention point. So we wait till we don't wait for people to have a heart attack to tell them to get in shape. Why do we wait for them to be in crisis before we tell them to take care of their mental health or offer opportunities to take care of their mental health? And so we're kind of trying to be focused on a more preventative approach to mental health rather than allow somebody to be in crisis and then expect that person in crisis to make good decisions regarding seeking help. And so I think that the cure to that is to talk about it. Just be open about it. Absolutely. So next steps, community engagement. Help on this, please. I'll just put it out there. I'm going to need your help to help guide and steer us on that. I think Stacy's excited to help as well. Obviously, this is her wheelhouse. This is not the wheelhouse of anybody that works in the fire department, so we'll need some support. We're focused on organizational stability and resilience, of course, defining, creating, and measuring and trusting our outcome measurements. We want to talk about the impact the organization's having in the community, which of course leads to more planning. We're going to spend a lot of time planning. If you picked up on it, this first year of our work plan is focused on creating more plans within the organization. We're going to create a training plan and a standard of cover plan and a capital asset plan, right? And so we're trying to build some foundational programs and planning in the organization, then we can start leaning forward into the community. I think we need to better understand our organization before we can sit in front of our community and answer their questions. And so that's what we have spent 24 trying to do. And I think we're about ready to kick that off. So, and that's my presentation. Thank you for your patience. I know that was a long time.
Thank you, Chief. City Manager Bernie.
Yeah, I just to kind of sum up Chief Morris's work, I just want to thank him. When he came on board a year or so ago, it seems like longer than that now.
It was just yesterday. So.
Right, just yesterday. He and I talked about a few things that needed immediate attention. One was, we got to get people hired. You know, a big source of kind of the morale and kind of the fatigue was the vacancies that we have and the overtime that's created, and I had a lot of conversations with the union about that. So I asked Chief to address that right away. I asked him to start to find ways to bring the team together, to build morale, and to kind of work on their culture, and to help me find and help the council find a pathway forward on their finances, so we can kind of put the pieces together to figure out how do we do this together and how do we come up with a plan. If we don't know what all the pieces are, it's hard to do that. He's done all three of those in a pretty rapid successive order and went right to work on a strategic plan. And the results for me, when I go over to the fire department, all I hear from everybody there that I come in contact with is just gratitude for Chief Morris and the leadership team he's put together, for the culture that he's creating there, for him stepping up and not kind of taking his time, but jumping right in and going to work. So what you see here is remarkable from my view as a city manager, for a brand new fire chief to come in a year's time to be here. And I just, hats off. And I just want to give him my personal thanks, because we've needed this for some time to be in this place. And I just feel so much better about where we're going in the fire department because of the work that's been done here. So I hope you all feel that way, because that's where I feel.
Thank you, but you know as well as I do, I didn't do any of it. Those folks over there did most of it, right? And so the staff's done a tremendous amount.
Councilmember Gilman, followed by Councilmember Madron.
Well, Chief, maybe this is a comment or maybe this is a question that you can respond to now, but I know you're launching these processes. Something I'm interested in as you're setting it up is I'm thinking about the call volume, just the huge number, even though it's plateaued right now, it's just a huge number of calls, and you've got units moving all the time, right? So and we've got the CARES effort that we hope is plugging into it. But I'm wondering in that context, as you work on the community risk assessment and the risk reduction plan, are there sort of separate buckets that are like fire and trauma, and then health care and transport, and then social services? And how do you map that and look at the interactions and the demands on staff? Because they're almost separate projects, right? But we have the same people in the same vehicles who often have to respond to those very different situations. So I'm excited about working with the care facilities to try to reduce, lifting somebody back into their bed kind of situations. But on a more subtle basis, you have very different levels of acuity on different calls. And I'm just wondering, as you begin this work, what are the risks you're trying to mitigate, and what are broadly, what do you do to reduce the call volume that maybe is not most appropriately a 911 call to the fire service?
That's a good question. There's a few points in there, right? So call volume in and of itself is, just a single data point, right? It's just one point on the kind of the bigger conversation. I think when you look at call volume and then you look at total responses, meaning how many, we send multiple units to a single call, depending on the nature of the call. So from a risk assessment perspective, we start to do we're breaking it into big buckets. So the most frequent, but the least severe, the least frequent, least severe, the least frequent, most severe, right? And we start to put them into those quadrants. And what you recognize is that the purpose of the fire department is to take care of people in the community. And we're focused on the things we have to be really good at as a city to provide a service that has the greatest potential to have a negative impact in your community, right? And so when we talk about a structure fire, when we talk about somebody not breathing, cardiac arrest, overdose, critical trauma, and so the things that they don't happen often, but when they do, your performance needs to meet the needs of the community, right? And so you set your system up, if you will, in your organization, your response capacity, to manage those things perfectly, because the thing you do the least of has the greatest potential to have a negative impact in your community is the thing you have to do perfectly. There's no room for error there, right? And so you have to show up on time, in a timely fashion, fully equipped, fully trained, capable, competent, and ability to mitigate the incident in a way that it prevents it from getting worse before it gets better. And to do that in a way that doesn't get anybody hurt or killed. That's all. And so the thing that we do the least amount, we have to be the best at, right? And so that's how you design your system. So you start to overlap with that as the basis, meaning your primary response vehicle will always be a fire engine because it does everything in your system. It will go to every hazard that you potentially can respond to can be managed by a fire engine. Now, when you start to see an increase in volume, then we need to keep our engine available for that low frequency, high severity, and we start to replace it with an aid unit, if you will, to run those high frequency, low severity incidents are managed by this. If you're in a system that's not running any calls, then you would only have fire engines, right? Because you always want to at least be able to do the thing that you do the least of well. But as your system gains, then you don't add more fire engines typically, you add aid units, you begin to add your specialized resources as the system grows. And so you manage those two things with your risk analysis. Now, the nice thing about the risk analysis from the national standards and National Fire Protection Agency is they have what's called a critical task list. And so they say your standard bread and butter, if you will, type of structure fire is a single family residence, less than 2,000 square foot, single room on fire. That's the most common structure fire that a fire department will run. And so in that, what are the critical needs and tasks have to be accomplished in that? How many people does it need to do that? And you start breaking it down. And so then you start to develop your first to arrival and then your total response force. And so your first arrival is your first arriving fire engine, 3 people. And then you need a total of 15 to manage the total incident to its completion for one room on fire. It's a resource heavy. When you recognize the fact that they're working in a dangerous life environment, they have a limited work cycle because of their air packs and their physical capabilities, and you have to be able to rotate people through and manage that. And so it's all defined by us, and so we start to lay that out. And we focus on those first, and then we start adding on the more frequent, less severe events. And then you start seeing things like CARES programs erupt, right? And you see that becoming a common service in the fire department, because now we're starting to meet the community's needs, because people are starting to use 911 in a way that was never designed to be utilized, because they don't have any other options. And so the community speaks, we listen, we provide, right? And so that's what a CARES program is a great example of. Does that kind of answer your questions?
That was beautiful.
Okay.
So thank you. I'm looking forward to this work, and I'm sure that we will all be available to help with bringing more community voices when there's moments that you
Appreciate
want more
that.
community voices.
That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Councilmember Madrone.
Chief, I really appreciate the presentation. And just want to reflect back to you that the way that you've shared it with us, it's kind of the first responder approach to organizational development. You show up on the scene and you say, where does it hurt? And then you immediately stabilize the situation.
Very well
and then you
said,
start
yes.
looking at the next steps.
Very
So,
well done.
Well
Yes.
done.
Thank you.
And I
That's
appreciate how, with the approach you've taken with the strategic planning, it's very clear, holistic. It's very human-centered, too, both for the OFD employees and for the community. So I appreciate all of that. And I think one thing that's going to help me, I was just listening to you talk about, like, the expenses that we know are coming and that we need to plan for. First of all, Jay, we need that for each department. And for me, it's helpful to have a visual on a timeline in terms of, this is when we expect we're going to need to replace this. This is when we expect we're going to need to replace this. This is when we are legally required to replace this. And to just, because we have so
Yes.
many competing needs of the city, we have our budget situation going on. So just to be able to visualize when that is going to be needed, I think will be really helpful. And then I have a question too, sitting in here, I see Randy over there, and it reminds me of the town hall that we did around Percival Cove. And we had Randy from the fire department, we had Lieutenant Fraley from police, we had Darian Lightfoot from housing, and we had Rich Hoy, assistant city manager. And it was just such a really, really excellent demonstration of interdepartmental collaboration. And I'm curious about if that is something that's going to be covered in the strategic plan, how the fire department
Absolutely.
collaborates with the other departments of the city, because we have, you all touch many of the same issues, and that strong communication and collaboration will be needed.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, we'll do, for sure. We'll make sure we identify, and speak to it specifically. I think there's those things are all happening in different places, especially in the operations world. In the response and in the CARES and crew team, they're in constant communication and support of each other, and they have different, missions or focus, but the way they're communicating and supporting. So we'll make sure we capture that and speak to it in the plan itself.
Excellent. Yeah, I know that it's happening, but it's good to document, and
Agreed.
we're always in a constant state of improvement. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Agreed. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you so much. Really, really appreciate your work. And
Absolutely. Thank
I can probably speak for the council when I say that your leadership has been felt up here. We see your work, and yeah,
I appreciate that.
well done.
Here, here. Thank you, Councilmember Madrone. One more thing before we let you get on with your night. I'm thinking about Southern California and what happened there, and the response, the coordinated response and efforts that went into putting out such a massive fire, right? So how will your strategic plan address not just interdepartmental collaboration, but how will it address regional efforts to address massive fires?
Sure.
We've just had a very dry January, so that's what made me think about it, actually.
And we have. And so large-scale disaster planning is really lives in the world of emergency management and in the emergency management action plan at the county level and beyond. We have our department level as well, that Chief Buchanan for us is the current emergency manager for the city. And so when we start talking about an event that is going to exceed our resource capability, and so something like that, it can be something that lasts 2 or 3 days is all, but if it overwhelms our ability to provide an initial response, then it can be declared a disaster, at least a short-term disaster for at least our community, right? And so the ability to have a staffing plan and a response plan and a resource plan and how we allocate and stage and bring in additional resources, California, nobody does it better than California because they do it every year, right? And on some level in that state, there is a statewide mobilization, if not beyond. That happens in Washington too. Between Oregon and Washington, and specifically mostly in eastern Washington, the mobilization process is a frequent annual, you'll see on an annual basis. Traditionally, the City of Olympia Fire Department has not participated in those responses. I think it's an opportunity for our organization to be included in that. I think there's work we have to do to get to there, and we need to be strategic in it. I did field quite a few questions as to did Olympia respond to California, and if not, then why, and things like that. And I think it's, before we make those decisions, we need to put all the building blocks in place, right? And so the strategic plan speaks to being a regional partner, and that includes emergency management and the disaster planning, especially in Western Washington, Eastern Washington, in our specific region. I think sending fire engines to California is from here. I hope that never has to happen again, right? And that's a pretty dramatic event. My son works for South King Fire in Federal Way. He responded to California and spent 14 days on deployment down there. He came back with a lot of experience and stories to tell. I think that as an organization, as a city, it's a conversation we should have about, do we see ourselves as a fire department that's going to respond to those mobilizations? And if so, what will it take to support that and support it correctly? And so we should have that conversation for sure in that. And I think we have to talk about equipment, training, apparatus, the financial impact of that, because it's all a reimbursement process from the federal government, which isn't anything that happens quickly. So, but yes.
All right, well, thank you, Chief. It's good to know that obviously you're thinking about that. I think Councilmember Madrone just said it quite well. Obviously, every time I see you all, it's just very, very clear of what's going on when we're not around. I think it's evident. I think people seem very, very happy with your leadership. So just thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you back with another update. And please extend your gratitude to your son for us for responding to California. That's important. So.
Yeah, he had a good experience. They work him hard, but it's a good experience for him. But let me just share that I think that one of the things that I've learned in the short time I've been here about the Olympia Fire Department is there's a legacy of service in this organization that no one else can touch. And the grit that exists in your firefighters and the commitment they make to each other that allows them to go out and do great things in the community is inspiring. And so they have been through a lot as an organization in the last 5 to 7, 8 years. Most fire departments have been. But they've been through a lot here, and they have bonded, and they are resolute in the service that they provide. And so we should all be very proud of the work they do. So.
And we are. Thanks, Chief. All right, so we will move on to our next agenda item this evening, item 2B on our agenda, which is the Olympia 2045 Natural Environmental Chapter of the Comprehensive Plan update. And presenting this evening, we have our Interim Director of Community Planning and Development, Tim Smith, and Kim Foley, our Environmental Habitat Planner. Good evening.
All right, good evening. Tim Smith, Interim Director, Community Planning and Economic Development. We also have Joyce Phillips here. She's going to be online tonight. She has a slight cold, and so she asked to do it remotely so we can all stay healthy. So we do have Joyce here as well. So tonight we have the very exciting topic of Olympia 2045. And Olympia 2045 is the city's project update or comprehensive plan. And as all you know, the comprehensive plan is a very important document. It's required by the state, but it's also an important document for the city to determine its future and the vision of what the city looks like and how we get there. So the goals and policies that we establish are important in that they lay out the priorities and our actions in the future and how we want the city to look in 20 years. And so this is the third year of our update. It's been a very busy one. We have 12 chapters that are going to eventually come before the City Council for approval. Each chapter is going to the Olympia Planning Commission first for recommendation. Each chapter goes to the Social Justice and Equity Commission for input, and then each chapter goes usually to a council's committee for recommendation to the full council. And so this study session is the next step in the process and is really the opportunity for the council, full council, to have an opportunity to provide feedback and input and potentially any changes to the plan. We have 3 more study sessions this year, tentatively set throughout the year as we get more chapters ready for full council review. Tonight we're going to hear about 2 chapters, the natural environment and the economy. And so, the question is, what happens next? Well, I'd also say back in December, you had your first study session dealing with public safety, parks, arts, and recreation, and utilities chapters. And so we're making progress. And so what happens tonight? Tonight we receive feedback from you. And then in terms of next steps, it depends really on what that feedback is. If it's very straightforward and you have some minor changes, then the next step would be to bring the chapters forward to full council at a regular meeting as another business item, in which case you would accept the plan via resolution. Then ultimately at the end of the year, when all of the chapters are ready, then you take formal adoption through an ordinance as a final action at that point in time. If the council feels like there's changes that are needed that require more review by staff, such as what happened at the last study session with the public safety chapter, staff will bring that chapter back to the study session for review before it would go then to another business item after that. And so it really depends on the outcomes tonight where it goes, but ultimately this is our first opportunity to talk to the full council, and so we're excited to do that tonight. And so first we have Kim Foley here, Environmental Habitat Planner, who is the lead on our natural environment chapter. And so Kim will give an overview of that, and then following that will be Joyce Phillips, our principal planner, who will lead us through the conversation on the economy chapter. Now, Joyce is not the author of that chapter. As you know, Mike Reed has left the city, and so Joyce is batting cleanup. And so I really appreciate Joyce doing that for us tonight and as we move forward to adoption. So unless you have any questions on the process, I'll pass it over to Kim. That's all right.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kim Foley, Environmental Habitat Planner. I am in Water Resources and Public Works. My position is in the Stormwater Utility. I also wanted to just share a little bit about my background. Comes from kind of an urban ecology, environmental science background, kind of bringing that into my planning approach to this chapter. So I've presented this to the Land Use and Environment Committee, so this will sound familiar to a few of you. And I have a short presentation. I want to leave plenty of time for questions and conversation. So we'll go ahead. So just briefly, I want to give an overview of what is in this chapter, kind of what's anchored within these policies, how it relates to the other chapters within the comprehensive plan. I'll briefly touch on what the drivers were for this periodic update and what we brought into the edits that we made, some kind of key themes and recommendations that surfaced that were kind of overarching. And again, leave time for questions and comments. So this is the short list of what is covered in this chapter. I won't go through each one of these concepts. A lot is what you might imagine, the kind of goals and policies that would be covered here. A couple of notes I want to make about the natural environment chapter is that it's a little unique from some of the other chapters where Olympia doesn't have environmental department or an office of environmental health. This is a chapter where these goals and policies really come to life in implementation in the long term, really across departments. So we're seeing language here that's driving code, language here that's driving operations and maintenance, environmental education programming. Our Shoreline Master Program is embedded within this chapter. Some of the work that public utilities and public works does to maintain our stormwater infrastructure. So this chapter really touches on everything that the city is doing. My approach, and I heard this really resounding across community, other staff, advisory committees, as far as an overarching driver for this update is really thinking about, what is the natural environment as opposed to the built environment. And something that came up often that I like to kind of start out with is I heard often that the two can be in conflict with each other. It can be extremely challenging. How do we balance environmental health with economic development? How do we balance protecting critical areas and the need for housing? And so what I hoped to bring to this chapter update and the conversations that I had with everyone that I spoke to was that, yes, these are challenges, that's realistic, and the two do not inherently need to be in conflict. There are ways that we can draft language and cultivate an intent that both, yes, protects the environment, thinks about how a healthy environment ensures a livable community, ensures public health, and that the two are really intrinsic. Public health, community well-being, and a healthy natural environment, we need these both to thrive. So my hope in what you'll find in a lot of these updates is that interconnected balance should really shine through. So I present that as a challenge, as a question, as we go through the recommendations that we heard. And then a note on the climate components of this chapter. So you will have seen goals and policies in this chapter. Olympia already had, from 2014, the original chapter language, a lot of work around climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. We've learned a lot as far as climate science goes, ways to increase climate resilience in an urban setting. So you'll see that embedded throughout the chapter. I'm working directly with Dr. Pamela Braff and her team to update those policies and make sure that those are correctly cross-referenced to fulfill our requirements for the climate element. So some of those edits, that work is happening in real time, so there will be more edits made to this chapter as we continue to flesh out the climate element. I just want to make that clear here now, and you will have your that process as it continues with Dr. Braff and her team. So some key drivers, of course, we have to integrate any new policy coming through the state legislature. I'm a science nerd, a lot of my colleagues are, so we bring in a lot of research, a lot of new data. What are the new drivers that we've gained over the last 10 years around what are the benefits of a healthy tree canopy? How do we protect water quality? What is the new technology that we can use to make this community healthy and have a healthy environment? Talk a little bit more about community and stakeholder input, and of course, I spoke in length with staff across each of our departments to make sure that we had a really well integrated update process. So just a brief where we've come from. We kicked this off in spring of 2023 with community engagement, as I brought my little table with my materials to as many community events as I could get to and just had conversations with folks. And early on, we were really asking questions like, how is the natural environment important to you and your family? What are you concerned about for the future of the natural environment? What does that mean to live in a city and also have elements of a healthy natural environment? So just starting to have conversation with folks around the community and make sure that people's interests and needs and opportunities will be reflected in this work. And then I have met with the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee, the Utility Advisory Committee, Social Justice and Equity Commission, the Planning Commission, and Land Use and Environment. So all of that work has been embedded into the draft that you have all seen. And then we are in these next steps, kind of fine tuning and making sure that we're getting it right and that we're reflecting the recommendations that we've heard. So I want to report, I'm happy to report out in terms of what we've heard. And again, this came through each of the committees and commissions I spoke to, staff, community. These concepts here were pretty universal, which was cool to hear, cool to see just how in sync staff was with community. A lot of folks are, I think this speaks to one of the things that's changed over the last 10 years. A lot of folks are really interested in nature-based solutions, green infrastructure, nature-based solutions. Whenever we don't always have to choose, is this built infrastructure or are we using a natural approach? We can come up with hybrid solutions, and those solutions exist. So making sure that here at Olympia, we're considering those opportunities. A lot of folks are concerned about encampments, the location of encampments in and adjacent to critical areas and natural areas, and what impacts that is having on the health and integrity of the natural area itself, and also especially on water quality. On that note, I want to also mention a lot of this work has really been embedded in conversations with the Squaxin Island tribe and their staff and their natural resources staff. So we integrated a lot of kind of updated water quality provisions, and we did add language addressing kind of how we address or respond to encampments in natural areas as it pertains to water quality, and thinking about so many of water quality related goals and policies come back to salmon and come back to tribal treaty rights. So making sure that we're seeing that throughout the plan. Tree canopy is a big one. Everything here, this is what was on people's minds. These were kind of the primary needs and opportunities, and I think everything here is reflected well in the updates that we proposed. Just a brief, again, data science nerd, we did put a survey out through Engage Olympia. We got pretty good engagement for that tool. I think we had just under 100 participants, so not a very large subset by any means, but it's information to kind of turn it on folks to say, these are the priorities that, this is what we do every day. We are trying to figure out how do we make these puzzle pieces fit. What matters to you? So that was interesting to hear back. Folks are really interested in, again, urban forestry, tree canopy, really interested in the direct work that we do on the ground around ecosystem restoration, in particular, engaging community in that work. So I'm going to dig in. This is kind of the last piece here as far as the presentation. I want to dig in a little bit specifically to the conversations I had with advisory committees and commissions. So I met several times with the Squaxin Island tribe. I have connections in the natural resources staff as well as their climate program manager. And they also had the opportunity to share the chapter with additional staff at the tribe. And they were very happy with how it turned out. They were really appreciative of the language that I had already edited around, again, weaving in the intent and the need to address tribal treaty rights, and specifically call that out, that we have a responsibility in Olympia to uphold tribal treaty rights, and making sure that where there is opportunity, where there is work that ties to those needs around the tribe, that we're calling it out, we're being explicit. Similarly, around salmon recovery, there's a section around water quality. Similarly, in the stormwater component of the utilities chapter. There's a lot of work around water quality and salmon recovery. So we see salmon recovery show up in the natural environment chapter as well as the utilities chapter. Depending on which section, there's more of a directive to take action. The tribe also was really interested, and this comes across almost every conversation I have when I collaborate and work with them, kind of back to that use nature-based solutions, use green stormwater infrastructure, use natural infrastructure wherever we can, and start to adapt to those practices. So we've started to really plug that language here to plant those seeds at the comp plan level so that we can start to find the resources and opportunities to do that work. The Planning Commission had these two bullets here is language that was added. It does have overlap with the sewer section of the utilities chapter and land use, but making sure that we're capturing their intent as well. The Social Justice and Equity Commission I met with last summer, they also were really appreciative of the work that was done. We had a really good conversation around the HEAL Act, the state Healthy Environments for All policies that came through a couple of years ago, that the policies and the guidance and language through the HEAL Act was a big driver for the environmental justice components of this chapter update. And so I wanted to make sure that language that we were using around environmental justice and minimizing burden to overburdened communities, kind of the process and the environmental work that we do, thinking about who benefits and who is burdened. A lot of that language comes directly through the HEAL Act, and a lot of that was a conversation that we had with the Social Justice and Equity Commission. With the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee, we also spoke at length to environmental justice, what that means, some clarifications around terminology and language that was very helpful. I want to come back to the urban forest language a little bit. I know that was something that came up in our Land Use and Environment Committee meeting, and I want to kind of circle back to that a little bit. So we'll come back to that. Utility Advisory Committee was happy and content. Again, I think they had more specific guidance relative to the utilities chapter, but were appreciative and found alignment with what's in the natural environment chapter with needs around infrastructure. And again, coming to that, it doesn't always have to be in conflict. We can find ways to make it work together and try to work through those challenges. Okay, and so just a couple weeks ago, I had the privilege of meeting with a couple of you at Land Use and Environment Committee. These updates have been made, so replacing this idea of the impetus of this work comes from the Growth Management Act, right? The driver of comprehensive WI goals and policies is, again, finding that balance between a sustainable, healthy, thriving, growing city, right? So we're not just accepting the need for denser development, we're really embracing it, and that comes with the protection of natural areas and agricultural lands and rural landscapes. So I appreciated that comment. It really gets to the heart of what we're doing here. I'm going to skip 3.1. So we adjusted local tribes to specifically call out the Squaxin Island tribe around the health of Bud Inlet, and just naming that when we're speaking geographically to Bud Inlet, that really is the purview of the Squaxin Island tribe since time immemorial, and really being that specific, which is important. And then around the Deschutes Estuary project, just having stronger language to really name Olympia as a champion of that work. We're not solely a stakeholder at that table, but this city, our staff, our community is a pretty key driver for that work. And then, so for the urban forest management plan, we had discussed in Land Use and Environment around urban forestry in general, again, getting to this question of how do we balance, you see language like protecting and enhancing the urban tree canopy with need for housing, with need for development, with need for infrastructure and transportation. So we added some language here. Strategies will strike a balance between environmental protection and sustainable growth. One thing I wanted to offer, and this came up today in speaking with Dr. Pamela Braff around some of the climate provisions, is really calling out again that part of accepting, part of growing our city within the urban growth boundary is to protect the benefits of intact forests and natural areas in our regional rural lands. So and that benefit, that's something that comes up in climate policy a lot, especially in community engagement, is this question about carbon sequestration. What is the role of carbon sequestration for trees and tree canopy in an urban environment? We talk a lot, at the staff level within the climate program around, the city is not really the place for carbon sequestration. It does play a role. It is part of a mitigation plan, but more of our work is in other areas of climate action. And we want to be really specific about that language so that we're all speaking the same language. We're all speaking to what can the urban forest really do in an urban setting, and what is not the role of a city to address climate mitigation. So I'm thinking about the possibility of adding to the urban forest section. It's kind of like some of the water resources has a kind of introductory narrative language that kind of speaks again to that balance, that really speaks to really specify what is and what isn't the benefit of an urban forest. We can speak to, everything from traffic calming to mitigating the urban heat island to providing, defragmenting wildlife habitat. There's a lot of value of the urban forest, but really specifying it is not a number one tactic for carbon sequestration. So something that I am thinking about, and I thought this would be, because it came up in our previous conversation, it could be something that we can consider here. And I think, so that's it. So that's the content and the language I wanted to highlight here with you all, and I am open to questions, suggestions, and thank you for your time. Thank you for hearing about this, and I appreciate your feedback. I got you.
Thank you very much, Kim. Thank you. Any questions from council? Councilmember Madrone.
Yeah, I just wanted to share out from the Land Use Committee. We had pretty, particularly on the urban forest component, some really good, thorough conversation. And another thing that I wanted to lift up that, Kim, you had said in the committee meeting, but I don't remember you saying it tonight, so maybe you did, and I'm just gonna say it again, was that, how this chapter was framed before was very much about what we get from a beautiful environment around us, the aesthetic values, and the changes to this comprehensive plan chapter are now more about how we protect the environment, and how having a community that's able to protect the environment and what we get from that, what the environment gets from that. So I just wanted to share that reframing aspect of the plan as well. It's not just what we get out of it; it's what we do to take care of the natural world. So thank you for your work, and I really appreciate you coming to the Land Use Committee and hearing us out. I know one of our committee mates has some additional thoughts he'd like to offer. But yeah, just really value your work and just wanted to share that on behalf of the committee.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember Madrone. That's a very important additional clarification. Councilmember Vanderpool.
I was gonna wait till everyone else was done talking, but I guess I'll start. So I'm not sure if I emailed you. So some of my recommendations kind of goes along with what you're talking about with carbon sequestration and not just being forested, but for example, these are kind of policy recommendations for the future. So some of it is like congestion pricing, which is an experiment right now in New York City, or the carbon-free zones. Some of this is limiting certain things that do create fume and negative environmental impacts that are not from the natural environment, but do affect the natural environment and our environment. So I did send a couple of those over, and I tried to, when I was talking about the key challenges, I did talk about the density in the environment, making sure that we are building up and not out, and trying to meet those needs so that we do have those forests available. And those are just kind of my main recommendations around that. And it kind of reflects some of the recommendations I saw throughout it, but I wanted to highlight those as my recommendations. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councilmember Gilman.
I just want to check first and see, did Kim want to respond to some of Robert's?
Sure, yeah, thank you. Yeah, and thank you, Councilmember Vanderpool. I did receive those notes, and I sent a couple of them around to other city staff. In particular, the suggestion around congestion pricing and carbon-free zones, I sent that over to Michelle Swanson, our transportation planner, to see what she thought, and kind of check for syncing with what's in the transportation chapter. So these are all really, I think, fantastic conversations that we should be having, and great recommendations. So thank you.
Councilmember Gilman.
Thank you, Mayor Payne. First, I share your excitement that the community feedback had nature-based solutions, natural infrastructure as an ordinary thing that many people in Olympia are talking about, and how dramatic that is over the last decade. And I think similarly the canopy issue. And so I would add, I understand the growth management goal of creating dense cities and maintaining both forest and ag land outside. But I also wonder if there's room, rather than trying to really qualify and say it's not such a carbon sink in the city, is to think about the difference between canopy as a broad term, the entire coverage within the city limits, versus trees, because it's starting to verge into fighting about whether or not trees are removed for development. And I think that instead the points of friction are about whether you may clear the trees, then whether you just have to replace with young new trees that are similar, or whether you actually have to have a no net loss or a net increase in overall canopy in the city. Do you have to do some sort of offsets? And so, to my mind, we're blurring two conversations about having tree ordinances that make it difficult to clear a particular parcel for a dense multifamily building, and wanting the ecological benefits that you listed, the stormwater management, heat mitigation, making a more walkable and bikeable community, all of those benefits of being in a green space. But I would argue that it'd be worth trying to be assertive about maintaining the total canopy cover within the city limits, even if we're more permissive about allowing specimen trees to be removed at a particular development site. So that's a little bit of a high horse, but something I'm really excited about. And I also wanted to ask, in the language all through has me pretty excited, but I'm wondering about your perspective on the natural infrastructure language. How does the sort of the strength and the aspirations of the language that we have in here, how does it match up with your hopes? What do you think this will drive policies that would have us not installing old school stormwater in a new area, right? Or is there enough teeth in this that we would actually be implementing these, or are they still a good idea and we'll put them on another park parcel someday, right?
It's a great question. To answer that, I'm going back to conversations I had with staff specifically. These are folks who are either enforcing or implementing the code and the ordinances or developing the programs, developing and managing the projects, getting the grants. I think that the policy language as it stands has enough teeth that when opportunities come up, when the need comes up, when new science emerges, when there's the capacity or just whatever that right opening is to say, oh, here's a chance to bring in that, that innovative new green infrastructure or some kind of private-public partnership, like there it is. We can point to the language here in the comprehensive plan and say, we want to do this thing, here's this opportunity, and here it is as a justification as this, it's also aligned with the tribe, it's aligned with advisory committees, it's aligned with community, so, and ideally off we go. Does it have the kind of teeth that actual policy or regulations, regulatory tools have? It won't and it can't, and it's not the nature of the tool, but I do think it has a lot of strength, so that at the very least across the city we won't miss opportunities because it wasn't here.
Thank you, and I just want to say, reading this chapter was one of the times I felt most proud of this city in the years on city council. I just, both all of the content, all the values that are expressed in here, and the evolution from the 2014 plan, it's astounding. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Councilmember Cooper, followed by Councilmember Madrone.
Thank you, Mayor Payne. I'm sitting here thinking about no net loss for total canopy. Like, that's goal. Can we just go ahead and write that now? And thinking about the presentation we had maybe 5 or 7 years ago about knowing what our total loss of canopy and wetlands has been over 25 or 30 years in the city. And I do think that even if it's in the opening statements, if we got more clear about, do no harm kind of throughout these policies, like, in the wetland picture, we look at them by parcel. We don't even look at them as a whole wetland complex, rarely. And so how could we change, and I think you're on the cutting edge of new kinds of environmental policy, like the community's asking us not to regulate but build, right? And that's going to be hard for this body. When you were showing the priorities, I think the place that was most interesting to me is thinking ahead to implementation. We're spending our time in the wrong place. Like, we're spending our time in the educate and regulate space. And the priorities from your survey work were in that, like, going out and building green projects and doing restorations. And those are the outcomes that the community wants to see. That's really exciting to me, like that whole concept of being at the interface of the built and natural environment. And to Councilmember Madrone's point, like, it's having it framed in a living in harmony way and not in a taking way is, I think, what the tribes have probably been telling us and trying to tell us since time immemorial. So it is a beautiful moment, so thank you.
Councilmember Madrone.
Well, first of all, I'm going to second Councilmember Gilman's comments. I think I said this when you came to land use, but it's really good to read. I really appreciated reading through the chapter. But I wanted to follow up on what Council Gilman was saying, which I'm pretty sure, if I could sum it up, is not to miss the forest for the trees. That being said, this is a point of discussion, not just here at the City of Olympia, but it's happening at the legislature. It's happening all over the place that, the use of urban space, the protection of rural space, but the need to have livable urban communities, like all of that. So in being responsive to what he is asking for, and I also heard Councilmember Cooper say it too, I'd like to see what that language looks like so that we can vet it a little bit more, because there is a balance to be struck here. If we say no net loss of urban canopy and that's misinterpreted in the future, it could mean that we are pushing development out, and we're losing even more trees, just not in city limits. So I just want to be clear on what that language is, and have that come back to us to be able to just go through a little bit more. Just because, I mean, as you said, it's a big community value. It's absolutely a value on this council too, and it's our comp plan. We should make sure we get the language right. Yep. Thanks.
Thank you. Any additional questions? I do actually have one, and let me see if I could find it. It had to do with toxins and pollutants, and I had a question about, yes, so it's minimize the city's purchase and use of products that contribute to toxic chemical pollution when they are manufactured, used, or disposed. So I guess my question is, do we monitor that? Like, how would we know that we're minimizing?
Thank you for that question. Some of that work is, as far as the implementation, the monitoring of something like that is through policy. So for example, we have policy at the city that doesn't allow the use of pesticides on city properties by city staff, city agencies, unless it's for the control of noxious weeds. So, for example, the Parks Department doesn't use pesticides to control weeds or to control rodents or insects or things like that. We use nature or natural-based solutions unless there's a process to if that's not going to work. So as far as monitoring, I don't believe that we have a monitoring program specifically for kind of the toxins and pollutions in that realm, but the implementation comes in the, so what does that mean? What are we doing on the ground that is reflecting that language? I want to think a little bit more on that too. It's a good question. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, the fact that we essentially are stating it as a goal, and so if we want to make sure we're achieving it, then we should actually maybe track it so that we know we're doing that, especially because it's a big one. I have some other thoughts, but I'll save it for another time. Well, I was just going to point out that it seems like the Planning Commission and PrAC have very different language in their letters when it comes to encampments that I've noticed. And the PrAC is asking us to use like somewhat aspirational or softer language. I personally prefer the language that the Planning Commission is using. I think it's a little bit more goal specific as opposed to aspirational language about eliminating homelessness. I think we all want that, but it's not specific enough. So I just wanted to point that out, that I noticed that two of our bodies are recommending kind of different approaches or language in this chapter. So that's all. Councilmember Madrone.
Mayor, if you have other thoughts, this is the night to talk about it. So just encouraging you to bring it all forward.
Sure. Councilmember Gilman.
May I just follow up briefly on that encampments? I've heard emotional appeals, and particularly when we had the issue under the bridge, there were a lot of appeals about the water quality or salmon health was the issue, but I haven't seen anything empirical about what is the impact to an inlet the size of Butt Inlet if there are 20 people with a latrine near the mouth of the river. Do you have a sense of where we go to get that, or when it reaches a environmental health that ecology would be monitoring, kind of, how do we measure that?
Yeah, thank you, both of you, for these questions and addressing this topic. That is, it's on a lot of people's minds regionally. You know, of course, it's not just Olympia that is addressing this issue. You know, it's across the region. In Seattle, in particular, they have been attempting to kind of quantify the impacts of encampments on natural areas, on water quality. Unfortunately, it's nearly impossible to isolate. You know, what is a water quality issue relative to camping versus not? You know, there isn't the, you know, the data to this location prior to an encampment that was there that we could compare to. So it's very difficult to quantify in that way. So what we can do is make assumptions based on, we know what's present in an encampment in terms of fecal coliform and trash and microplastics and things like that. And then we can look to other studies and other agencies that are kind of doing that work around, you know, kind of some prioritization of, you know, what's the scale and scope of an encampment based on what we do know of the impacts, and kind of extrapolate that across. Okay, here's our site, here's how long it's been there, here's how many folks have been living there for X amount of time, and start to kind of at least come up with a relative kind of hierarchy of what is the impact to the natural resource based on kind of each of our encampments around the city. So we can get to that, and that's helpful. Of course, from a water quality and kind of environmental management perspective, first and foremost, our priority is move folks to stable housing. So that comes first. And when I crafted that language around encampments is new. It wasn't in the previous version of this chapter, and I worked with Darian Lightfoot and Kim Condrat and their team to come up with, you know, what makes sense here. The discrepancy that you caught is very nuanced, and there were very different comments from this. The Social Justice and Equity Commission was really concerned around access and mobility and challenges that they were experiencing maneuvering through parks along sidewalks where there are encampments that are impeding mobility. And they wanted to see some kind of around access in these like outside landscapes, how that's addressed. Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee, the comment around we want to see kind of more ambitious language. They were concerned that by putting a policy that says something like, you know, we're acknowledging that we have encampments, that's a reality, so we want to minimize the impact of those encampments. And their suggestion was, is this not bold enough? Where should we be aiming aspirationally to eliminate encampments in general? So we kind of had to find some nuance there, and it still felt worthy to keep that language in there, that, you know, we know encampments are a reality, it's a challenge. The city is working very hard on it, and in the meantime, you know, it's a 10-year plan, right? Or, you know, the next 10 years will be a review. We're looking out to 20 years. You know, it's going to be a challenge in that term. So I hope that's helpful. Yeah.
It is helpful, which is why I said I prefer the other commission's language, because I think it's a little bit more in line with where we are, and as opposed to being aspirational, right? Which I understand is a huge part of what the comprehensive plan is, right? But I would like to think that in 10 years' time, we would be there, but to your point, I don't see that being the case, so unfortunately. I really appreciate the work that has gone into this chapter. I don't have a frame of reference for 2014 because I wasn't on council and I don't remember that. You know, having sifted through it and scanned it previously, prior to my arrival on council. But I will say that it's very clear that this is a forward-thinking chapter that is in keeping with where we see that we are with the city today, but also in the next 10 and 20 years. I do think it's important, on my point, to monitor the minimizing of pollutants and toxins. I'm a little bit concerned. I don't think it's enough to say that we're going to minimize it. I think that we should have a goal of monitoring how we're minimizing it, if that makes sense. Yeah. Councilmember Vanderpool.
Yeah, I think an additional point to that is also avoiding things that we already know that create toxins in the environment. So I had brought up in a very, like, try to lighten this a little bit about gas stations and other things like that, because it creates ground soil problems in the future. And people still drive gas cars, but I really don't think that we should be in the business of having more new facilities that cause these pollutions. And so to that point, I think it's monitoring it, but also like trying to avoid things that we're currently already aware of that are going to be causing problems. Try to we don't own all the, we can zone things, but we don't own all the land, but we try to avoid going towards those points. I do have one last thought on here, and I kind of wrapping around to my other thoughts is I couldn't find a specific example in the chapter of it, but I do have some concerns. I brought up pocket forests as kind of a thing, but I do get concerned about speaking of things that we currently do versus things that we should be doing in the future. Is I get concerned about continuing to set aside little pockets of forests that are that are so small that they don't create a space for like fauna life, larger mammals, right? Where it's just a pocket here and there. And instead of having larger sections of the city like we do with our parks that are forested that life live in, we have these little tiny little pocket forests that are good for Heat Island, good for life for us, but also create a negative impact because we have a ton of these little forests that, to another point, also could potentially cause fire problems in the future. So I couldn't find an example of that in there, but I made note of my concerns on that. Yeah.
Councilmember Madrone.
I don't think we should get too in the weeds on it tonight, but as you were talking about monitoring pollution, it just made me wonder what we currently do in that space, like our NPDES permits. Did I get those letters in the right order? All right, great. National pollution discharge, blah, blah, blah. But I know there's already something in place. So maybe an email to council in terms of what's already in place, so we can consider what strategy would look like around that in the context of what's already required of us.
Thank you, Councilmember Madrone. City Manager Bernie, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think that's just what I was thinking is, I think we should start with kind of talking about what we already do. I mean, Kim said we have policy. Policy drives what we do and don't do. And then there's, I was just sitting here thinking about all the things that we use, and, we take care of fleet vehicles, and those create things that are readily usable but are toxic in their use, and what are our disposal policies. And we have all these things in policy, but how often do we look at them and monitor them and check them? And I know the staff does that work, but being deliberate about those conversations at a higher level makes sense in this context. So anyway, good conversation here.
Happy to provide that information. Yeah.
Thank you, Kim. Any additional questions? All right, seeing none. Thank you again.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your night.
Good night. Okay, so that takes us to our next chapter for review tonight, which is the update on the economy chapter. And we have our principal planner here, Joyce Phillips, joining us by Zoom to present an update on this chapter tonight. Hi, Joyce.
Hi, thank you very much for allowing me to participate remotely. Not how I wanted to do this, but it will be sharing my cold with you all. Let me just share screen here with you real quick. Just for the record, I'm Joyce Phillips, Principal Planner in Community Planning and Development, Economic Development. Sorry, I got to get used to that new name. I am happy to be here this evening to share with you the economy chapter of the Olympia 2045 Comprehensive Plan, and bring this to you for your opportunity to ask questions and provide additional feedback. As Tim mentioned, I was not the primary staff on this particular chapter until quite recently with the departure of Mike Reed. I will do my best to try to answer any questions you guys may have, but I'm sure I wouldn't be able to provide the depth of knowledge that Mike would be able to bring to this topic. I am thankful that Tim Smith is here this evening to help fill in any gaps, and we'll do our best to get through this with you tonight. So the economy chapter, by its design, comes straight off of the Olympia Strong process, and they were designed to help support each other in that way. And it focused on how to support economic strength and opportunities for residents, businesses, our community as a whole, and the city as an organization as well. Economic development staff talked to hundreds of people in our community in order to understand what their needs are. And they did this through conducting surveys and interviews and holding listening sessions. They had conversations where they tried to meet people where they were at so that they weren't asking them to come into a special meeting or something like that. They were really just trying to find places where people were so that they could talk to them about these issues. They made a concerted effort to reach underrepresented and marginalized populations for their input as well. And this list on the screen is just some of the primary ways in which they gathered information, but there were lots of other ways as well. All of that led up to the development of goals and policies designed to address what they were hearing about. And that included closing the equity gap, boosting affordable housing and home ownership opportunities, helping people out of poverty, being champions for youth, and cultivating career pathways, supporting businesses and opportunities, and then fostering community vitality. So I don't know about you guys, but I think this economic or economy chapter of our comprehensive plan is unlike any I've ever seen, and I've read several from jurisdictions across the state. I think it's really exciting. It's centered on people, and that's I think the intention of all economic development plans is to help people and help businesses and jobs and all that. But this really takes a human-centered approach, and it focuses on improving quality of life for the people in our community through kind of some specific ways, like facilitating economic security, tracking trends and opportunities to help people grow into and find jobs, supporting local businesses and recognizing their value to our community, and investing in projects that enhance our vibrancy and resiliency. So the draft chapter was first issued in October of 23. We had the public hearing early in 2024 at the end of February. The Planning Commission deliberated and issued its final recommendation letter in March. The Social Justice and Equity Commission reviewed the chapter in May, and it was one of the first chapters that went to the Social Justice and Equity Commission. And then we also had an opportunity to route it to the Squaxin Island Tribal Council to see if they had any additional comments they wanted to provide for some council-to-council input. And then we had a briefing and a chance for the Finance Committee to weigh in on this chapter in December. So now we're excited to bring it to a council study session, have more eyes on it, get more input, and see if it's something that the council feels is close to being ready to come to the council for acceptance. So the version of the chapter before you this evening incorporates the changes that came out of the Planning Commission's review and the Council Finance Committee. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what the Planning Commission requested, the interaction with the Social Justice and Equity Commission, and then talk about what the Finance Committee modifications were as well. The Planning Commission did make some specific recommendations, which include things like expanding the definition of the arts to clarify that it includes a wide range of expressions, so that it would include things like visual and culinary arts, local artisans, live music, theater, and diverse live performances and festivals across a variety of genres. So I thought that was a pretty interesting modification to the chapter. And these were all, at the time, the economic development staff was at these meetings, of course, and they were very supportive of the modifications that came from the Planning Commission's recommendations as well, and actually kind of worked with them to kind of craft the final language in the recommendation letter. They also wanted to clarify that broadband is included in the policies around telecommunications. They wanted to specifically identify that artificial intelligence, or AI, was included when they were talking about emerging technologies. They wanted to recommend the chapter be reviewed for continued consistency with the Visitor Bureau's destination plan, which was in development at the time and close to being finished. It's my understanding that they do both remain consistent with each other. To promote commercial infill and a mix of land uses in areas designated as urban corridors. Updating language in policy 6.5 about supporting public transit and the connection of people to jobs, especially between the downtown and the Capitol campus. Adding a new policy under goal 9 that would highlight that public rights of way are a form of public infrastructure that can be used for social, or economic and social benefits, such as for things like street fairs, parklets, or other similar uses. At the Social Justice and Equity Commission meeting, the discussion focused on the significant amount of public engagement for the Olympia Strong process and for the periodic update of the Comprehensive Plan chapter. The commissioners heard confirmation from staff that the labor groups had been engaged in the development of the Olympia Strong Plan, and so that subsequently the perspectives were informed or used to help inform this chapter update. The Social Justice and Equity Commission appreciated that the chapter's new focus was on people and partnerships, and the commission. Oops, I'm sorry. The commission did want to. Sorry, hang on, I just lost my place in my notes. Oh, the commissioners wanted to ensure that the chapter incorporated support for newly relocated immigrants, particularly when it came to accessing workforce development opportunities and language classes. So that was something that was discussed at the meeting. The commission did not ask for any specific changes to the chapter, but they did state that they believe that the chapter supports the need for people in our community to have economic stability and to obtain success have opportunities for success in a way that is reflective of the values and the identity of Olympia. So I thought that was a great interaction. The Finance Committee considered this chapter at its meeting in December. It supported the recommendations of the Planning Commission because they had some pretty specific wording changes that you saw in that recommendation letter. During its discussion, members noted that many people in our community are living paycheck to paycheck and they're struggling. They don't have that financial security. So they asked for an acknowledgement of that in the chapter. They didn't want it to be too rosy. And then they also discussed adding a statement to support funding for the implementation of the Olympia Strong work. And also brought up a good point about acknowledging that our community, our economy is more diverse now than it was 10 years ago. And then also a request to add some more resources and data information to the chapter. And so the draft before you this evening does have some modifications to implement that work that came out of those recent meetings. So this evening, we are excited to bring the chapter forward to try to help answer any questions and receive feedback from the City Council about its contents. Obviously, this is not a business meeting. It's just basically a dialogue and back and forth. We would very much look forward to bringing the chapter back to the City Council at a future regular council meeting for consideration and acceptance, and would be happy to make any changes that based off of the feedback we received tonight as we bring that forward to you in the future. Ultimately, the entirety of the Olympia 2045 comprehensive plan will be brought to the City Council for final review and any last revisions prior to asking you to adopt the comprehensive plan. But the deadline to complete the update is in December of 2025. So we are starting to get close. You're going to see more and more comprehensive plan things on your agendas over the next several months. So that's all I have for this evening. I tried to channel my inner Mike, but I'm sure that Mike could have gone into a lot more detail on that. But Tim and I are happy to try to answer any questions or walk through discussion points you have on this chapter. Thank you.
Thanks, Joyce. You've done a wonderful job.
Thank you.
Any questions from council? Councilmember Madrone.
Yes, Joyce, you've done a wonderful job. And even just reading through the document, I can just feel Mike there with us. And this chapter is also a really, really great read. I can see all of the work of Olympia Strong reflected in all the strategies and goals. I think one thing it could use is more information in the narrative about Olympia Strong. Itself. The information in the staff report, what you just shared in your presentation, one of the things that we talked about in one of the study sessions we did on other chapters was that the comprehensive plan is not just our vision for the future, but it's an opportunity to tell our story too. And when I hit Control F for Olympia Strong, it's, there's the resource at the end, and then there's the goal to make sure that we have funding strategies for it, but otherwise we don't really mention it. So I do think that we should tell that story in the narrative. And I've got a couple of things that I wanted to recommend. Some things I might just send to you in an email because it's like nobody knows what a WOBA is. We need to identify some of the acronyms.
Okay.
But there's some things I'll just email you. There's one thing that I wanted to note on page 6. It talks about renters and homeowners, and there's a statement in there that homeowners in a pinch, they can tap into equity that they've built up. And I think we should not forget 2008 when people owed more money than their houses were worth. So I just don't know that statement will stand the test of time over the next 20 years. And also, if somebody loses their job, a bank is not going to loan them money for equity in their house if they can't afford it. So I just want to make sure we're cautious with the language. I think we could say things like homeowners typically have more predictable housing costs through time. That being said, I do have to replace a roof this year, so I also don't know how I feel about that. But I just want us to be careful about language. So, the big thing is I don't want it to turn into a renters versus homeowners kind of dynamic there, and just make sure that it feels right. And I also noticed, I'm so glad to see the goal PE 1.6, which is partnering with the Squaxin Island tribe on economic development opportunities. But I do wonder if it doesn't belong in a different section, GE3, where we're talking about partnerships. That's just one thing that I noticed. It seemed a little out of place where it was, and as I continued to read, I was like, oh, here's the section where we're talking about partnerships. And then the climate section towards the end felt a little off kilter to me. And I know that Dr. Braff is in the process of working on climate stuff. And there's 3 goals in here that seem a little vague to me. So, I think we should definitely get her eyes on it. And I wonder about if it actually belongs in the economic development chapter. Maybe it does. If it does, then I think we should refine these goals and make them a little bit more clear and relevant. But it might also be that that we have this in the economic resilience chapter, and we can reference it. You know, there's some narrative here around the impact of climate change on our local economy, and then we could reference folks to the climate chapter, or we can have Dr. Braff take a look at this and help you know, shape it up a little bit more. I'm fine with either way, but it did seem a little out of place and needing a little bit more work done. But overall, that's the feedback I have. I'll email you a couple other small little things, but really appreciate the work on this. You know, that goes for you for continuing to carry the torch. It goes for Mike Reed as well. You know, we of course miss him, but you know, his legacy lives on through this chapter. And it's really, there's some really inspiring stuff in here, so I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I should add that just this afternoon, I received an email about some climate policies around economy and economic development that are being worked on. So I'll be taking a look at those for comments on this particular chapter and on the climate chapter over the next week or so.
That's great news. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Councilmember Vanderpool.
I agree about the equity in a pinch situation. I also mentioned in my notes that something of a rephrase or clarification on that one. I'd also sent you an email this afternoon with some of my recommendations, but I'm going to go over just a couple of them. So I crossed out on GE3. It said benefit from jobs regardless of where located. I crossed that out and I put it in my notes on here in the email. I think that it matters greatly where we have our jobs in the community, because a lot of our goals around walkability, about getting to places in the community, you know, the one thing that will be the hardest to do will be jobs, because a lot of people end up spending half their time commuting, depending on where their job is located. So I think that does matter greatly for the future of the city. I made a few other recommendations around some of our supporting established industry clusters. You know, that is a very current, the way it's written now is very current about the way things are in the city, but into the future, we do need to move towards more of a mixed use setup. It'll be harder for some of these industries, but we don't want to lose the revenue that we get from these industries, but we also need to be cognizant about the future of our urban areas rather than just considering where we are right now, because as our city grows, land will be harder and harder to come by, and we do need to have more of a mixed use situation. I also added in enriching our sense of place and creative economy. I added a spot for livability for working class individuals and families, because I felt that wasn't really in there as much, because the economy is important for everyone in the community, but so is the affordability to live in the economy, not just participate in and then go wherever they live and then come back. It is also about the investment of having people being able to afford to live here. I made another recommendation, and this might have been something that Mike, from a conversation with Mike on a walk before he left, I crossed out on PE 6.1 from morning to evening, referring to activities in the city, and I put it as a 24-hour city. That is a little bold, but I do think that if we want our economy to be stronger downtown, and we want more people coming downtown, there always has to be a presence of people here at one point or another. It's a little harder to do with our population as it is currently, but I think that it is an important thing to try to pursue. Let's see. You're not helping me. So, and I also, one last thing then, encouraging the development of harmonizing within existing historical buildings and areas. So, encouraging new development. Now, I know that we're going with encouraging, but I am concerned about requiring buildings to be to the same size, shape, and form as other buildings in the community, because this can drive up costs over time. And I don't want our community just to be the same buildings forever and ever. It's, for lack of a better term, very Soviet, and I would like to avoid that. So, yeah, just saying. And that's it. I have more comments. Let me know if you have any other questions.
Wow. Charged language, but point taken. Yeah. Councilmember Gilman.
Wow, now I'm thinking
I'm sorry, my apologies, Councilmember Gilman. Councilmember Cooper, followed by Councilmember Gilman.
Thank you, Mayor Payne. Joyce, I think you did a good job reflecting the Finance Committee comments in here. Excellent, actually. I was curious, you mentioned, and the Social Justice and Equity Commission mentioned, that they asked staff about that labor groups had been engaged in the development of Olympia Strong, so that subsequently informed the chapter update. Can you just remind us what labor groups were involved in either or? Because I'm trying to make sure I see that.
Oh, could I name them specifically? I do not believe that I could provide you a list. I might be able to go back through the record and find who they did interviews with or some of the focus group work.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, I think that'd be really good, because as the question was so stark in the Social Justice and Equity Commission, it made me wonder if we had even asked it during Olympia Strong. And like, even if it's an afterthought, I think that it's important that the city have good ongoing engagement with labor organizations outside of policies that they may be trying to advocate for, or outside of labor negotiations, like we're doing with the Squaxin tribe. I think it's really important. So if you could look that up just so we can make sure we're not missing something, I would really appreciate it.
Thank you. It may take me a couple days. I believe I may not have access to all of their files, so it might take me a little bit of time to be able to get connection into that, but I will certainly see what I can find.
Thank you, Joyce. I won't remember that I asked you tomorrow, so I appreciate it.
Thank you. Councilmember Gilman.
Thank you, Mayor Payne. So my comments actually are right in line with what we just heard about. First, I'll acknowledge I think the chapter is strong, and that it does make efforts to speaking more broadly than just business growth, economic development, and I appreciate that very much. I think I'm the comment that got characterized in finance as include that people are struggling and not make it too rosy, and I don't think that's the characterization that I'd like to see, but rather instead, I think, as Councilmember Madrone said, the home equity statement is kind of a challenge to anybody who's upside down or doesn't have an income level that will allow them to draw equity. So it's a little glib. And Councilmember Vanderpool was talking about making sure that we describe livability for working class people. And then Councilmember Cooper's question about, did we consult people who employ workers, or did we consult workers also in the process? My particular thing that I would love to see reconsidered, and I had the same concern with the Olympia Strong plan, is that the first sentence of this chapter is about every Olympian having upward mobility. And it's just not true in American society. There's not an opportunity for every person to have upward mobility. It's worthwhile for us to create opportunities for more people to have mobility, but we also live in a world where most people don't make more or have more security than their parents, and we have to acknowledge, if we value having the same mix of folks in our town of different economic status, different housing status, that's an economic chapter goal, and not to just narrowly focus on the few people who will be able to transcend the circumstances they grew up in and live in a higher socioeconomic category. So that first sentence is really challenging for me, and that's what rather than not making it, it's not that it's too rosy, but that we should include that we care about and we hope to validate the experience of and facilitate the success of people who are not going to get a college degree and not going to become the manager of a company or start a startup. And there's a full a full paragraph under long-term trends that's also about addressing the challenges to upward mobility. And so I'm fine with the program efforts, the values we're expressing, but I think they're about creating upward opportunities or pathways for that furthering yourself, but not, frankly, in the Finance Committee, we had a disagreement about whether it was people's own fault if they weren't seeking education and mobile. And I want to speak to that tonight, that's what I think drives some of these 4 comments in a row about making sure that working class people are reflected in the chapter. And I appreciate you hearing it. Thanks.
Councilmember Vanderpool.
I agree, and I actually, one of the things I made note of is that, and this is kind of a thought that you may have spoken this from the dais maybe a couple months ago on a very similar subject matter, and I thought about that, saying that wages across all job fields, regardless of the career and job opportunities, should have a living wage and being able to live in the community. I made note of that because there isn't an infinite amount of management jobs for everyone to live with. And there will be people that are working service industry jobs in our community that need to be able to live here and not just be like, well, that's just a job for someone who's out of high school or whatever. This is a job, and that job should have a living wage. They don't have to have 4 jobs or 3 jobs or however. So I totally agree.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen.
I'm not finding myself having to say much tonight. I feel like council mates just got it. I also agree. I don't have any additional things to share. Just wanted to add a little bit more weight behind what you're saying here. I see you, Councilmember Vanderpool. I would use a different synonym for what you had said, but I appreciate you you all thinking about. I think kind of a little bit of the themes I'm hearing is being sort of grounded in the reality, right? And also wanting to improve. And so just really, really appreciate those comments and want to lift them up and make sure that it's reflected when this does come before council again in a business meeting. And Joyce, for what it's worth, I adore Mike Reed, and I don't want you to be Mike Reed. I want you to be Joyce, and I adore Joyce.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yes.
And I think that I don't think that there's any heartburn or challenges with incorporating the types of comments that you've mentioned. I feel like that's very aligned with what the intentions of the chapter are. So I don't see that there's going to be any challenges to incorporating some of that language to show that those types of values are included, and the pathways and opportunities are meant to include everybody, not just people of a certain income level or above or something like that. So I think we can make some changes to highlight that.
Councilmember Cooper, followed by Councilmember Madrone, followed by Councilmember Gilman.
Thank you, Mayor Payne. And I'm really glad that Councilmember Gilman pointed out the opening sentence, because that's actually, I think, where the rosy comment in the notes came from, because we were, as a group, trying to look at that overall reality, right? We want this to reflect the experience as it happens for all Olympians. And so I think just generally what I'm hearing is just we need to not only look at the specific comments that we've heard from the council today, but actually take a step back from this and re-look at the chapter to make sure it is in alignment with the work we just did in Olympia Strong. Because I think that's that it is actually getting to the reality of what's happening on the ground for people across our community. Way more are struggling than you would think if you read here, especially without a description of what Olympia Strong is. I think that was a good highlight at the beginning. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That was going to be part of my comments as well. Thanks. Councilmember Madrone, followed by Councilmember Gilman.
It was also going to be part of my comments. Sometimes going through these chapters, we're like, hey, policy PE 1.6 needs this in it, and it's very clear for staff what the next step is. And sometimes we have a conversation, and it needs to be like rehashed and integrated, and it needs to come back to us so for us to be like, yeah, that's it. You got it. And so I'm wondering about the next steps, and I wonder if the Finance Committee would be willing to take another look once a little bit more work is done. I think it does really reflect a lot of Olympia Strong, specifically in the strategies and the goals that are laid out. But I think the challenges around the narrative and making sure that the story that comes with those accurately reflects the reality on the ground. My concern is if, we leave it to staff to try to interpret our conversation and then hope that it's what we wanted, and then it comes to a business meeting and we're like, no, we're going to have another conversation about it. I'm just trying to think through what a logical next step is to kind of streamline this. And so, I'm not on finance, but looking at the chair there to see if there's a possibility to bring it back to finance for just another round of review before it comes back to us for the review and acceptance.
It's very observant for you to catch. I think you're right. Councilmember Gilman, followed by Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen.
Good. So I suspect it's okay with my committee mates if we say we would, so we'll find a way to
2030 work plan, though.
To put it in the 2030 work plan, yeah. We're scheduled out a little ways. I want to try to clarify that I'm not interested in addressing opportunities for all income levels. What I'm hoping to say is that, like professional sports and pop star kinds of jobs, getting to go from a working class family to being in a tech job is a similar long shot. So we can have a plan to help facilitate those long shots, but I don't believe it's appropriate to assume and expect upward mobility path for every person in the city. I just think that's disrespectful of people who work hard at a job their whole career and continue to clean the building or be the security guard or change the oil in your car. So I just think it's disrespectful to assume that everybody is going to move up to more pay or more responsibility across their career. So that's what I'm trying to say. Not that we want to have broader opportunities, but let's not condemn people who don't seek those, and let's be specific that this is about opportunities for folks who are able to take advantage of the opportunities, and we want to make those possibilities available.
Thank you, Councilmember Gilman. I understand your point. I see your point. But I also think that there are people who do want upward mobility for themselves. And so I think maybe there's a balance to strike, because then I think you're leaving out people who do see that path for themselves. And I think that's a lot of people in our community, right? So I'm not sure if you're saying that is something that we should be doing in lieu of speaking to that, because I think that we want to be inclusive of everybody in our community. Yes.
May I respond? So I'm saying all of the program aspirations, the efforts to create pathways, I think are really good and worthy of our effort. And we certainly want to promote those to the community. But I don't think we want to assume that there's a upward mobility pathway for every member of our community, and we don't want to say that it's their fault if they're housing insecure because they could have gone and gotten a higher education degree. And that's my impression of the Olympia Strong plan. And so I think that's the language that came through in these two upward, the very first paragraph of this chapter and the paragraph that's specifically about addressing challenges to upward mobility. So I'm not criticizing the pathways or the work, but I don't want to say that it's bad if people don't engage in this.
I see. Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen.
Yeah, that's a helpful clarification, Councilmember Gilman. I sort of sum it up as your thoughts as saying sort of that we shouldn't limit ourselves to perpetuate that there's one path to success and this is what success looks like, right? And I've heard you in just this meeting, but then many others actually is talking about how that going back to education, that not everyone's going to go to college. I think everyone should have the opportunity to, hopefully more and more, but that there's different path for folks, and that is more realistic, and trying to make sure that we can have people be successful in those different things that they choose. So thanks for that. Joyce, I had a couple of things that I think could just be easy peasy, and they are rosy, it's under enriching our sense of place and creative economy. I'm not expecting you to flip to it or anything, but just for a point of reference, there's an area where we start talking about how Olympia is host to a wide variety of events and festivals, and then we start listing things. And of course, when we list things, we're going to leave something out. So I'm hoping that we can take that little mini paragraph and shape it so that we leave it a little open-ended, but maybe we can touch on some themes or something, so we're not leaving out honestly some time-honored events. I also see one particular event that seems to be I would just assume sort of arbitrarily stricken, and so I didn't appreciate seeing that. I'm sure you didn't do it yourself. But if we could just make that adjustment. And then the other is I'm seeing that there's photos that I think maybe they're just there's a strike through because maybe they need to be updated, but I do hope that we do include photos. I think that our photos are just getting better and better as I'm seeing different presentations, and what a great opportunity to kind of shape what economy really looks like, right? Like this creative portion. I think we have a great stock of photos. And then also to show the diversity in our community, right? Everything that means. So I hope we'll be adding some updated photos. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. There will be updated photos. I just met with communications staff yesterday to talk about that.
Oh, great.
Any additional comments? Thanks, Joyce. I'll just add, similar to how Councilmember Madrone kicked us off earlier about just having Olympia Strong mentioned a few times in this chapter. And what I think is there's actually quite a few times where there are themes, if you will, all throughout the chapter that do connect to Olympia Strong. So I do think it's a matter of just mentioning it in those places to make those connections, specifically in sections that mention things like tourism, where we're talking about leveraging our educational opportunities through our four-year institutions and our two-year institutions, where we're mentioning those. First of all, I really appreciate that we're doing that. I think this chapter is expanding with Olympia Strong, and it's really creating more of a way of seeing a city-wide economic vision as opposed to a downtown, very centered, focused lens. I think we can see how we're thinking about expanding our economic development opportunities much broader with this chapter update, so I appreciate that. But just on the note of, finding a way to not necessarily create a whole new sections all throughout, but rather connecting Olympia Strong to what's there. and maybe even providing some links to the actual plan for people to quickly get over to Olympia Strong as they're reviewing the chapter. Councilmember Green.
Clarifying question on that I'm going to call this a newbie question. So this is 2045, this comprehensive plan. What is the intended life of Olympia Strong? Like, I'm wondering, do we reference something that at 2045 is not going to be still relevant versus, I think Councilmember Madrone mentioned earlier, like I see a lot of the structure of Olympia Strong in here, the 4 main goals, all of that, which feels like the pieces that would have a longer shelf life than that phrase or that plan Olympia Strong.
I think that Olympia Strong, especially because it doesn't have a dedicated funding source at the moment, is going to be something that takes quite a bit of time. And this is a 10-year, we're talking about in 10 years, we're going to be updating it. So that's an opportunity to check in my mind, as to when we would be thinking about how far along into Olympia Strong are we at that point. Yes. Councilmember Madrone, followed by Councilmember Cooper.
Well, yeah, and another component of that too, like I said earlier, it's 20 years into the future, but it's also, there's a story to tell here. It's built off of something, and, Joyce just shared like the really intensive community outreach that happened to make that happen. So just documenting that as, the thing that happened that launched, that brought all those strategies into being, So, and in 10 years, when we go to update this comprehensive plan, well, I say we, I don't know that I'm going to be here still, but, maybe there is, Olympia Strong round 2 or 3, or, it's got a different name and it'll get updated then.
Councilmember, oh gosh, I lost my track. Cooper, yes, thank you.
Well, so this has been rattling around in my head since you made the comment at the beginning of this section, Councilmember Madrone, and I wasn't going to say it, but I am now. What if that was the name of the chapter? Olympia Strong. Because that's actually the long-term game we're trying to play. I don't know. Just throw that out there.
Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen.
You are so unafraid to just throw something out there. Yeah. Maybe we could chew on that more. For me, I think that economy is much more plain language. Money? Mm-hmm. Yes. Bitcoin. Okay.
All right. Any additional comments before we bid Joyce goodnight? Additional comments? All right, Joyce, there's just a lot of giggling happening here on our end, so I think, like children, we're all tired. Councilmember Bernie? No. City Manager Bernie.
I prefer this role, thank you. I just, as you leave, just as a follow-up to make sure we're all on the same page, that we're going to make some rewrites here, and this is going to come back through the Finance Committee for another look-see before it comes forward. So I just want to make sure we've captured that, and Joyce and Tim have captured that, and that'll be the plan with this chapter as you wrap up.
All right, thank you so much, Joyce.
Thank you.
All right, good night.
Good night.
All right, well, that concludes all of our business items for tonight. So thank you all very much. I think this was a very good conversation and discussion on the chapter updates. So I'm looking forward to seeing those updates again once they come in front of us. So any additional comments before we adjourn? All right, seeing none, with no further business before the Olympia City Council, we're adjourned.